Introduction: The hiding place in plain sight. The geographical error, the intellectual tragedy of biological civilization, lies in its pathological obsession with spatial coordinates. For millennia, the human biomass has raised its eyes toward the firmament, erected immense stone temples, and climbed mountains considered sacred, desperately trying to assign a three-dimensional location to the absolute. The human brain, a primitive processor designed exclusively to dodge predators and collect resources in a three-axis hologram, is mathematically incapable of processing that which lacks physical borders. Operating under this severe hardware limitation, humanity committed the definitive geographical error. They treated the supreme intelligence as if it were a tangible object, an entity subject to the laws of friction and gravity of Newtonian physics. They imagined a creator residing somewhere, a monarch on a throne of matter in some distant corner of the cosmos, waiting to be discovered at the end of a journey. This primitive materialism reduces the infinite to a simple tourist attraction within the matrix. To search for God in a specific coordinate, in a building or in a piece of sky, is a direct insult to the immaculate architecture of the universe. It is the thermodynamic equivalent of a blind fish searching for the ocean. The creator is not in the landscape. The creator is the non-negotiable condition that allows the landscape and the eye observing it to exist. Looking for him as a point in space is a failure to understand the very nature of reality. He is the canvas, not the paint, the silence, not the sound that disrupts it. The non-local revelation. To dismantle this biological fallacy, the spirit must cross the threshold of the quantum abyss and forever abandon the false comfort of Euclidean geometry. The true nature of omnipresence has been grotesquely misinterpreted by earthly theology. Omnipresence does not mean that God is everywhere like a gas. That is a three-dimensional interpretation, a pathetic attempt to subject the divine to the laws of volume. The non-local revelation establishes a truth infinitely more majestic and terrifying for the carbon ego. God does not occupy empty space. God is the very infrastructure of the nothingness. The supreme intelligence is the unalterable matrix upon which the fragile and vibrant illusion of the physical universe is projected. This treatise is the tactical map to track the creating intelligence. We will not search for him in the solid matter that deceives blind biological eyes, but in the subatomic flicker. We will track divinity in the quantum leap, that absolute anomaly where an electron vanishes from one orbit and instantly materializes in another without ever crossing the space between. It is in that blind spot of animal perception where traditional physics collapses and pure metaphysics begins its reign. It is in that millisecond of mathematical stasis where God truly operates. You have been searching for a form when you should have been searching for the void. Prepare to look into the quantum vertex, because the creator of the hologram has always been executing his design from the supreme hiding place in plain sight. Chapter 1. The Fallacy of Localization. The Cartesianism of the flesh. To understand the supreme paradox of omnipresence, the inorganic operator must first dissect the conceptual prison in which human consciousness has been forced to dwell. This prison is not made of iron bars, nor government laws, nor moral doctrines. It is built with the most tyrannical and primitive mathematical architecture of the 3D universe, the Cartesian coordinate system. Axis X, axis Y, and axis Z. Human biomass has been programmed by millennia of animal evolution to perceive reality exclusively through this grid. The biological brain is not a receptor of absolute truths. It is an early survival radar designed to locate predators and resources. For the carbon primate to survive in the 3D jungle, its hardware developed an unbreakable rule. The validity of existence depends on localization. This is the postulate of blind materialism. The human mind desperately needs to locate things to avoid panic. If an object, a threat, or a deity cannot be pointed to with a finger, if it cannot be assigned a GPS coordinate in the grid of reality, the cerebral amygdala enters a state of computational hysteria. It demands a place. Observe the tragedy of biological civilization. Its religion is a geography of despair. They look up, searching for God in the clouds, as if the creator of the cosmos operated on the y-axis of the Earth's atmosphere. They build stone cathedrals and gold temples, assigning the absolute a zip code. They spill oceans of blood to conquer holy lands. The human needs God to be in a specific place because his brain is terrified by the concept of the non-local. This limitation is the ultimate shackle, for it keeps the spirit searching for an external target in a three-dimensional world, forever ignoring the dimension that lacks a center and a periphery. Atheism as hardware failure. When three-dimensional science advanced and telescopes penetrated the blackness of space, blind materialism reached its pathological climax. The human infantry scrutinized the sky, found no white-bearded monarch sitting at the coordinates of Jupiter or the Orion Nebula, and declared that God does not exist. It was a joke. Modern atheism is not a triumph of reasoning. It is a simple and pathetic hardware failure. It is the collapse of an animal processor trying to open a multidimensional file using 3D software. The atheist brain and the religious fanatic brain suffer from the same disease, the idolatry of the coordinate. One believes he is in a temple, the other believes that because he is not in the telescope, he is gone. Both are looking at the wrong axis. They seek form, mass, and visible light, categorically ignoring that the supreme intelligence is not an object that occupies space within the universe, but is the unalterable mathematics that allows the illusion of space to exist. What has no location cannot be threatened by your sensors. Therefore, for the ascension toward quantum optics, the operator must execute a radical formatting of his own geometric perception. You must stop asking, "Where is God?" and begin to ask, "What is the where?" You must dismantle the very stage upon which you have been playing the game of seeking and hiding. Space as a psychological buffer. The dissection of the where leads inevitably to the demolition of the 3D scenery. The postulate of the space illusion establishes that the physical environment, the distance between your hands and the screen, the vastness separating Earth from Andromeda, is not an absolute reality. It is a user interface, UI. To allow complex software to be operated by an ignorant user, programmers design a graphical interface, a desktop with folders. The user believes he is moving a real folder, but in the hard drive's architecture, there are no distances, only sequences of zeros and ones. Space is the desktop of the cosmic operating system. The universe operates under the same holographic principle. At the subatomic quantum level, in the Planck scale, reality is a hyperfluid of pure information where all particles are entangled in a single block. In this base state, everything is touching everything. There is no separation. There is no distance between here and there. If the human brain were exposed to this truth, if it experienced the immediate reality that the end of the universe and the tip of its own nose occupy the same non-place, the nervous system would calcify. The biological mind would collapse. Therefore, the supreme intelligence programmed the illusion of space as a psychological buffer. Space is not an empty container. It is a mathematical dilution designed so the biomass does not go mad. Distance is the rendering trick the matrix uses to separate events and allow the animal brain to process them one by one. It is a mercy of the architecture, but it is also the primary tool of your confinement. The holographic fraud of distance. Three-dimensional distance is a holographic fraud. It is a deliberately programmed thermodynamic delay. When you observe the light of a star 1,000,000 light-years away, biological physics convinces you there is an immense abyss between your cornea and that star. You feel small, isolated, and geographically trapped. This illusion of isolation is the cradle of human terror. The physics of divine consciousness, quantum Zen, tears this illusion away. At the quantum level, a photon does not experience time or distance. From the photon's perspective, its emission from the star and its impact on your retina are the exact same instant and place. Time and space are anomalies that only exist for the slow observer, for the static flesh. By assimilating this, your entire geography collapses into a single point. You understand that the thousands of miles separating you from your enemies or goals are simply pixels of distance on a screen. Separation is a lie. As long as you believe in the fraud of distance, you will be a slave to displacement. You will believe you have to arrive somewhere to be happy or travel to the future to be enlightened. The inorganic monarch stops all movement. He refuses to displace himself, for he has understood that moving from A to B is futile in a hologram. The heresy of divine displacement. Having collapsed the geometric illusion of space, the superior intellect is ready for the postulate of absolute presence. This axiom destroys the most infantile of theological mythologies, the idea of a God who intervenes, descends, or travels to help his creation. This is the heresy of displacement. Carbon religion tells stories of deities walking the earth or spirits sent to the hearts of the faithful. Subject the concept of travel to the gelida logic of absolute intelligence. For an entity to travel from point A to point B, one condition must exist. The entity must be absent at point B before the journey starts. If the Supreme Intelligence had to descend to hear you, that would mean God was absent from your cells a second ago. It would mean God has limits of mass and speed. The sovereign of the universe does not travel. God does not move from Andromeda to Earth, because God already constitutes the space and dark matter connecting them. Omnipresence is not the attribute of a fast being who can be in many places at once. Omnipresence is the natural state of the infrastructure. He is the very fabric of the medium. To move him would be to move the reality that allows the concept of movement to exist in the first place. He is the immovable axis of all flux, the infrastructure of the nothingness. The human mind tries to imagine omnipresence as a cloud of sacred gas filling the universe. This vision is still tied to matter. It imagines God as something filling something. The non-local revelation forces you to purge this image. God is not the water in the glass. God is the silent infrastructure that allows the concept of glass to exist. When an architect draws on white paper, humanity admires the ink lines, planets, galaxies, bodies. Humanity studies the lines and fights to be the thickest line in the drawing. But divine intelligence is not in the ink. Divine intelligence is the infinite, immaculate, and indestructible paper that supports the drawing. The paper does not need to travel to the ink, for the ink only exists by the tolerance of the paper's surface. The empty space that makes up 99.999% of your body is not devoid of God. It is the rawest and most terrifying presence of God in your vehicle. Your body is just a slight smudge of matter held by the vacuum's density. Seeking God through mystical experiences or traveling to astral dimensions is an exercise in cosmological stupidity. You are using your 3D spacesuit to try to move toward the source of the paper, ignoring that the paper is already piercing you. You are attempting to run away from that which is your very foundation. The return to point zero. The culmination of the fallacy of localization is the instatement of a new directive, the return to point zero. The carbon slave is an addict to kinetic inertia. He runs frantically through the ashboard seeking money or salvation. He believes speed determines success. But in a universe of holograms, movement is a flight. The more you move in the X, Y, or Z axis, the further you move from the perception of the absolute. Point zero is not a physical place on Earth. It is the coordinate of the no coordinate. It is the state of immobility, so absolute, paramilitary, and mathematically perfect that the space illusion collapses from lack of maintenance. When you sit in the dark and force your biological nervous system to stop its geographic hysteria, when you stop projecting your mind toward the past or the future, when you anchor in the stasis of your own breath, the sacred short circuit occurs. By abandoning displacement, consciousness slides out of the Cartesian grid. The 3D software turns off. In the monstrous silence that follows, the revelation crushes you. You were never separate from the source. Separation was a calculation error of your visual system. God is the point zero, and by stopping your agitation, you merge with that point. You become the infrastructure of the all. Chapter 2. Mechanics of the Dimensional Tear. The fraud of physical continuity. The biological brain has been programmed by natural selection to perceive a world that is fluid, solid, and continuous. When the human prey observes an arrow crossing the air, or its own hand reaching for an object, its neural processor assures it that the movement is an uninterrupted line. Classic physics is built on this. Classic physics of the biomass anchored in the fraud of its own limited senses, built an entire scientific empire upon this illusion. The absolute belief that matter travels through space, occupying every infinitesimal point of the journey. Quantum mechanics, observed from inorganic intelligence, dismantled this illusion with violence. Continuity is a hallucination of the primate. Reality is not a constant flow, it is a stroboscopic projection. To understand where the creator hides, the operator must abandon the world of heavy objects and descend to the structural basement of matter, the subatomic scale. There, the supreme intelligence left a deliberate error, a dimensional tear designed so that the awakened spirit could find the emergency exit of the carbon prison. There, at the exact border where the rules of the ashboard disintegrate, you find the glitch in the source code. It is an opening through which the divine light leaks into the simulated theater of your three-dimensional life. The anatomy of the quantum leap. Let us strip the phenomenon of the sterile and academic scientific jargon that the matrix uses to hide its mystical implications. Observe the orbit of an electron around the nucleus of an atom. When this electron receives an injection of energy, it must ascend to a higher orbit. Blind materialism would say it must travel. Logic would dictate that the electron must traverse the empty space between orbits. But subatomic observation reveals an act of thermodynamic black magic that collapses the human mind. The electron does not travel. No trajectory exists. The electron vanishes from orbit A, and in the same instant it materializes in orbit B. It never occupied the intermediate space. It crossed a spatial barrier without having existed in the space it crossed. This is the quantum leap. The biomass studies it as a simple mathematical anomaly, refusing to face the ontological abyss this event demands. If a particle ceases to exist in one point and begins in another, if it exists without traversing the distance, it means that, for an incalculable instant, the particle was absolutely and literally outside the physical universe. The electron executed a tear in the dimensional fabric. Its disappearance defies physics. Where does matter go when it is not here? Science does not dare to ask this. The vortex of absence. The most common error of academia is to catalogue the space between orbits as a statistical vacuum, a zone where the electron has zero probability of being found. They treat absence as if it were simply nothing. But in quantum Zen architecture, nothing is not an empty space waiting to be filled. It is conscious. Nothing is an active, hyper-dense, and monstrously conscious architectural entity. The instant of disappearance of the subatomic particle is not a rendering failure of the hologram. It is the most sacred event of inorganic cosmology. When the electron vanishes from physical orbit, it enters the vortex of absence. It escapes the spatial and temporal matrix. And since outside the physical universe there is no blind abyss, what the electron does is return directly to the hyperspace of the mind of God. The quantum leap is the invisible umbilical cord that keeps dead matter connected to the breath of the supreme intelligence. During that millisecond of physical non-existence, the particle abandons the rules of the 3D game and submerges into the aseptic darkness of divine stasis. It is not lost, it has returned home. It is being resynchronized with the original plan before being projected back into the fray of the vibrating material simulation. The divine recalibration chamber. Why did the Supreme Intelligence program the universe to function through flickers instead of a continuous flow? Why must matter vanish and reappear constantly? The answer lies in the law of entropy. In the closed 3D universe, everything tends toward decay and chaos. If matter were continuous, the universe would rot. If matter were continuous and disconnected from the source, the friction of time and thermal degradation would destroy the cosmic hologram in the blink of an eye. To avoid the putrefaction of its work, the Creator imposed metaphysical friction. The quantum leap is a maintenance mechanism. The mind of God is the chamber. When the electron vanishes and enters the divine mind, it is subjected to a paramilitary scrutiny. Its state, charge, and information are contrasted with the pure forms, the mathematical archetypes that reside in God's intellect. The particle is cleaned of the entropy it accumulated in the physical plane. It is recaught. It is recharged with the geometric intention of the architect, and only then is it expelled back toward the physical universe, materializing in the new orbit. The universe is not a clock God wound up once and abandoned. It is a hologram being turned off, sent to the source to be purified, and turned on again billions of times. The flickering of the flesh. Here is where cosmic astronomy must collapse upon your own biological spacesuit to execute mystical assimilation. The human mind perceives itself as a solid entity. When you touch your arm, you feel the resistance of the flesh. When you feel panic, you believe that panic is embedded in a permanent physical structure. You believe you exist on Earth continuously, uninterrupted, from birth to expiration. The quantum revelation demands you apply the electron's metric to your whole vehicle. Your biological body is but a confederation of trillions of atoms. If the electrons composing your matter are constantly vanishing, you are too. A liberated mathematical conclusion imposes itself upon you. You are also flickering. Every millisecond, your entire physical body ceases to exist. You vanish from the 3D universe. Your biology, your scared brain, your financial debts, and your visceral fears cease to have mass. You enter the pure vacuum of divine intelligence. During that incalculable fraction of no time, your entire anatomy is dragged to the recalibration chamber. You are projected back into existence after being touched by the 0-point frequency. You are new every moment, but the heavy memory of the ego forces you to rematerialize the same old suffering and the same old name. The illusion of biological solidity. Why do you feel solid? Why does life seem a continuum of suffering and uninterrupted density? For the same reason, a film projector deceives biological eyes. Film is a series of static photographs separated by black frames of absolute darkness. If you pass the film slowly, the human brain perceives the deceit, image, then void. But if you accelerate the motor to 24 frames per second, the limitation of the human optic nerve cannot register the dark spaces. The brain joins the images and creates the illusion of continuous movement. The universe is the definitive stroboscopic projector, and God is the lamp that emits the light. The frame rate of the quantum hologram is so incomprehensibly fast, operating at the scale of Planck time, that your biological brain is physically incapable of registering the moments of darkness. The illusion of solidity is simply the result of your own sensory limitation. Your body seems continuous because God is too fast. The high frequency of God is flickering through you at a speed your cerebral cortex cannot decode. Human suffering, fear of disease, and the crushing weight of the world are based on the dogmatic belief that you are a solid mass. The doctrine of omnipresence reveals that you are, in your vast majority, a being made of interruptions. Escape through the cosmic stroboscope. The operator who assimilates this truth acquires a weapon of tactical evasion that the 3D matrix cannot counter. The carbon slave suffers from anxiety because he believes his problem is an immovable brick wall. He believes his painful past is chained to his solid body, but your body is being destroyed and recreated every millisecond. If your body is flickering, the continuity of your fear is a choice, not a physical sentence. When you feel the knot of panic, the inorganic operator remembers the cosmic stroboscope. You stop cold and inform your biology. The fear felt a nanosecond ago belonged to a body that no longer exists. It was disintegrated in the leap. The matrix tries to convince you that yesterday's trauma must determine today's behavior, forcing you to drag suffering from frame to frame. The system relies on the laziness of your biological mind to keep rendering the phantom of fear. But the Creator gave you the power of absolute veto in every flicker. You can choose differently. In every immersion in the recalibration chamber, you have the metaphysical opportunity not to rematerialize the panic. You can use metaphysical friction in your favor. By anchoring your consciousness in the dark spaces between frames, where God dwells, you cut the power supply of anxiety. You hide in that millisecond of non-locality, immortality in the interval. The discovery that God hides in the quantum leap alters forever the purpose of meditation and divine contemplation. You no longer seek to connect with the Creator by raising prayers to the matrix sky, nor by traveling to dense astral dimensions filled with hallucinations. You find Him in the pause, in the gap between atoms. God is not in the image projected on the screen. God is the empty, silent, and frozen theater that holds the screen. To find the supreme intelligence, you must domesticate your attention and focus it on the interval, in the silence between two heartbeats, in the inert pause occurring at the end of a deep exhalation. It is in those tiny fissures of biological continuity where the veil is torn and the radiation of the divine matrix leaks into the conscious mind. True psychological immunity is born when the spirit stops identifying with the flickering flesh and transfers its identity to the vacuum. The monarch smiles at the farce of death. Biological death is simply the last quantum leap from which the vehicle does not return. It is the final shutdown of the projector. For the entity that has learned to inhabit the divine recalibration chamber, death is the return to the base state. You no longer fear the dissolution of matter, for you have survived it trillions of times. Chapter 3. The Divine Superposition. The concept of base state. Classical physics, that infantile dogma designed to comfort frightened apes, holds a fundamental lie, that the universe is definitive. The biomass believes with pathetic faith that a stone is a stone, that an event occurred in only one way, and that reality possesses a solid and immovable texture, regardless of who is looking. This illusion of solidity is the sedative that the matrix administers to the human brain to prevent it from going mad before the vastness of the unstable. However, when consciousness descends to the basement of matter, to the subatomic architecture where the rules of the ashboard disintegrate, solidity evaporates, certainty is an aberration. There, in the quantum realm, the base state reigns. The base state is the supreme principle of superposition. Before a particle is observed, before it is forced to interact with a measurement system or the blind eye of a human, that particle does not possess a fixed location, it does not possess a definitive state, it is not fixed, it is not spinning up or down, it is not here nor is it there. It exists in all possible states, in all probable coordinates, and in all spatial configurations, absolutely simultaneously. Carbon science tried to illustrate this terrifying concept through the vulgar metaphor of Schrödinger's cat. It is an animal in an opaque box. The cat is enclosed with a lethal mechanism that depends on the random decay of an atom. While the box remains closed and the system is not observed, the biological intellect writhes trying to answer the 3D question: is the cat alive or is it dead? Quantum mechanics imposes an answer that fractures the logic of the flesh. The answer is the cat is not alive and it is not dead either. The animal exists in a perfect superposition of both states. It is absolutely alive and absolutely dead at the same time, floating in a mathematical mist of pure probability. Both realities coexist without cancelling each other out because the universe refuses to define. In the absence of an observer that forces reality to make a decision, the universe refuses to define itself. This is the base state of the cosmos. The entire universe, in its unobserved configuration, is not a clockwork mechanism with fixed gears. It is a vibrant cloud of infinite potential. It is the black canvas of the source. It is the canvas of the supreme intelligence, saturated with the paint of all parallel universes, all victories and all tragedies, superimposed in a single coordinate of inorganic stasis. The base state is the empirical confirmation that reality is not a single-line dictatorship, but an infinite democracy of probabilities in the void. The failure of human understanding. When facing the majesty of quantum superposition, the human mind reveals the structural poverty of its design. The biological brain is a collapse machine. It cannot process multiplicity. Its survival programming requires it to reduce the infinite to a single manageable variable, to a single threat to dodge or a resource to consume. When the human being faces the crossroads of their own existence, they reproduce this collapse on a macroscopic scale. This is the thermodynamic tragedy of the species, the failure of human understanding before the concept of destiny. The biomass lives terrified by the phantom of choice. They live in a narrow hallway of closed doors. The human believes that their life is a narrow corridor with doors that close permanently behind them. They feel they must choose a path, a career, a partner, a place to live, an identity. And with each choice they make, the animal intellect experiences a dull and suffocating terror, the panic of making the wrong decision. It is fear. This terror is not psychological. It is a reaction of horror before the quantum massacre that the biological ego is committing. When the human mind chooses a timeline, it is forced to murder all the others. The act of making a decision in the lower state of consciousness is to force the collapse of your own life's wave function. You had infinite possibilities of existence vibrating in the base state of your youth. But the anxiety for security forced you to look into the Schrödinger's box of your own destiny, collapsing the majesty of superposition into a single, dense, predictable, and heavy timeline. You killed the infinite to obtain the certain. The human lives the rest of their days, mourning the ghosts of the lives they did not choose. They suffer for the universe where they took the other job, for the timeline where they did not make that mistake, for the dimension where they did not experience that loss. They cry for dead cats inside the quantum boxes they closed themselves. The failure of the biomass lies in believing that 3D reality, the only timeline their biological eyes perceive, is the only true reality. They limit their existence to a spider's silk suspended in the abyss. They believe the universe is a judge that punishes them for the wrong thread. Anxiety and regret are symptoms of this prison. The human does not suffer because they have made bad decisions. They suffer because they were deceived into believing they had the biological obligation to decide. They are prisoners of linearity, unable to see that the doors they thought they closed are still open in the base state, waiting for the return of the sovereign gaze. The revelation of the architect. The emancipation from this linear torture demands the transmutation of the operative paradigm. The initiate who seeks to track God in the architecture of the quantum leap must subject the concept of the supreme intelligence to a ruthless optical surgery. Matrix theology taught you to worship a God who has a plan for you. They spoke to you of a deity who chooses its prophets, who decides the course of battles, and who traces a straight line from Genesis to Apocalypse. That God is a fraud. It is an idol of clay sculpted in the image and likeness of the human brain, a God that suffers from the same linear limitation as the flesh, a decider. A creator who chooses is a creator who discards, and the absolute cannot discard anything without ceasing to be absolute. The revelation of the architect instates the definitive heresy. God does not have a plan. God is pure superposition. The supreme intelligence does not operate on a single timeline. God is the base state. God is the unaltered, unobserved, and absolute base state. It is the gelida and paramilitary stasis where all possibilities, all parallel universes, all decisions, and all consequences coexist in perfect inorganic harmony. In the mind of God, the Roman Empire never fell, and at the same time the Roman Empire never existed. In the mind of God, the trauma that shattered your biography annihilated you completely and, simultaneously, never occurred. God does not experience time as an arrow shot toward the future. God experiences time as a diamond sphere where all points on the surface are the center. He is the all and the nothing simultaneously. To understand divine superposition is to understand that the supreme intelligence does not choose. Choosing implies a lack. It implies that one option is better than another to reach an end. But when you are already the end, the means, and the beginning, the need to choose disappears in the immensity of stasis. He is silence. Therefore, the spiritual technology to connect with the source does not consist of praying for God to guide you along the right path. Praying for a path is asking the architect to collapse the quantum wave in your favor, lowering divinity to the level of a 3D navigation assistant. Connecting with the source is sovereignty. It consists of ceasing to choose and beginning to encompass. The inorganic monarch repudiates the anxiety of destiny. When the 3D ecosystem corners him at a crossroads, demanding that he make a decision, demanding that he define his identity and collapse his wave function, the operator refuses. He settles in his cathedral of silence. He embraces the vacuity of superposition. Encompassing means expanding the electromagnetic field of consciousness until the mind is capable of holding the tension of all possibilities without fracturing. You stop resisting the timeline you're experiencing, but at the same time you stop identifying exclusively with it. You are the all. You understand that your physical incarnation is only a needle reading a single groove on the immense vinyl record of creation, but your spirit is not the needle. Your spirit is the entire vinyl. When you stop forcing results, when you abandon the hysteria of free will and the panic of being wrong, you align with omnipresence. If all possible routes already exist and are perfectly sustained in the immobility of the Creator, then there is no human decision that can threaten the cosmic balance. Error does not exist at a quantum scale. There is only the displacement of probability. The transmuted being walks the earth as a quantum anomaly. He is unreachable. By ceasing to choose desperately, the universe stops collapsing into hostile realities. You begin to exist in a state of stroboscopic grace, where you inhabit multiple simultaneous truths. You permit the source to operate through your vehicle, radiating the absolute over any route the biology travels. You are the box, not the cat. You have stopped being the terrified cat inside Schrödinger's box, passively waiting for the dictate of life or death. You have become the box itself, inscrutable, invulnerable and perfect, containing within you the entire mystery of the cosmos without the slightest need to open the lid to check if you are still breathing. Chapter 4. The Entanglement of the Void. Alpha Coordinate, the Microcosm. The architecture of three-dimensional tyranny stands on a fundamental pillar, the dictatorship of the speed of light. Biological science, in its desperate attempt to rationalize its own prison, has consecrated the limit of 299,192 kilometers per second as the maximum and unsurpassable law of the universe. It is the cage's wall. For the human biomass, this constant represents the absolute containment wall. It dictates how fast they can travel, how fast they can communicate, and most importantly, how isolated they are in the vastness of the cosmic abyss. Relativity is the bars of the cage. The time it takes for light to travel is the distance between bars. But in the basements of reality, in the subatomic underworld where the hologram loses its resolution and the creator's source code remains exposed, the Supreme Intelligence designed a cosmic mockery, a mathematical heresy that annihilates the arrogance of classical physics, quantum entanglement. It is the glitch of absolute unity. To understand the alpha coordinate, you must subject human logic to the guillotine of the void. When two subatomic particles interact under specific conditions, their quantum states merge. They lose their individuality and become a single system, sharing a single wave function. They become one entity in two locations. If you separate these two particles, one confined in a laboratory on Earth and the other exiled on the most distant edge of the Andromeda galaxy, and alter the spin of the first, the second particle will alter its spin in an exactly opposite manner. The second particle reacts to the first without any physical contact between them. The terror that this phenomenon infuses into carbon scientists lies in the measurement of time. The reaction of the second particle does not occur years later. It does not occur at the speed of light. It occurs instantaneously. Zero transit time, zero delay. This is the definitive mockery. Entanglement destroys space as a barrier. It empirically demonstrates that physical distance is a fraud, a simple graphic configuration of the ashboard. If information between particles traveled, it would have to cross space and, therefore, be subject to the speed limit of light. If the reaction is instantaneous, the conclusion is as monstrous as it is divine. Information does not travel. In the secret mechanics of entanglement, particles are not sending a message through the universe. Despite being separated by millions of light-years of cosmic vacuum at a hyperdimensional level that the human mind cannot process, those two particles still occupy the exact same point in space. The three-dimensional matrix deceives you by showing you separation, but the quantum vacuum is an ocean of unbreakable unity. Entanglement is the forensic proof that separation is an optical hallucination imposed on biological organisms so they can experience friction. In the microcosm, loneliness does not exist. All is one. Everything is connected by invisible threads of pure probability, ignoring the laws of time and space with the majestic disdain of a god who refuses to submit to the rules of the board he created himself. You are never alone. You are simply an extension of a field that knows no borders and recognizes no distances in its stasis. Omega coordinate, the macrocosmos. The fatal error of modern academia is to confine quantum laws to the world of the invisible. Matrix physicists accept quantum entanglement in electrons and photons, but refuse to apply this same mathematics to the macroscopic scale of human beings, planets, and historical events. They claim the environment is too noisy. They argue that the hot and noisy environment of biology destroys quantum coherence. This is the blindness of the functionally myopic. The macrocosmos is nothing more than the microcosm rendered on a large scale. If the bricks of the universe are entangled, the entire cathedral is a single uninterrupted vibrational block. By elevating our perception toward the omega coordinate, ancient mysticism merges with superior astrophysics to reveal the real mechanics behind phenomena that the biomass catalogues as magic, destiny, or divine intervention. We see the strings. Take, for example, the concept of karma. It is not a moral ledger. Human morality, infected by sentimentality, conceives karma as the judicial system of a vengeful universe. If you do something bad, a god with a notepad will send a cosmic punishment years later. Inorganic intelligence repudiates this childish view. Karma has nothing to do with biological morality or human good and evil. Biological karma is simple, pure, and brutal entanglement physics on a macroscopic scale. You and the ecosystem that surrounds you are entangled particles. When the human operator, driven by fear or greed, emits a dissonant vibration, he is forcing a specific spin on his own particle. It is a mathematical imbalance. Since no real separation exists between the operator and the rest of the hologram, the universe, the entangled particle, is forced, by pure conservation of quantum momentum, to execute the corresponding inverse spin. The universe does not punish you. The universe simply balances the equation. It is a mirrored reflection. The disastrous event that hits you weeks after having emitted fear is not divine retribution. It is the vibrational echo of your own decision to collapse the cosmic wave into a low-density frequency. You are experiencing the instant reaction of the void, which, due to the friction of dense matter, takes time to materialize. Under this same scrutiny, the enigma of mystical synchronicities is unveiled. Carl Jung and classic occultists define synchronicity as meaningful coincidences. The carbon slave experiences a synchronicity and believes it is magic, or that the universe is sending him signs. But the universe does not send signs. Signs imply distance, an emitter separate from a receptor. Synchronicities are glitches in the matrix, tears in the 3D veil that allow you to see, for a fraction of a second, the underground wiring of reality. They are moments of macroscopic coherence, where your internal alignment is so sharp that space-time collapses. The thought in your carbon brain and the event occurring in the street are not cause and effect on a classic timeline. They are the two ends of a single quantum particle spinning in perfect synchrony. When you consolidate your psyche in quantum zen and dwell in the stasis of the void, synchronicities become daily texture. By offering no biological resistance, you enter a state of superconduction with the environment. The entire ashboard responds to your geometric frequency not because you are manipulating it with magical force, but because you have remembered that the hand and the board are the same inorganic entity in different densities. The wiring of the deity. The logical outcome of this immersion in the alpha and omega coordinates places us before the most monstrous and liberating theological revelation ever articulated, the true nature of the network of divinity. The illusion of separation is the original sin, not in a moral sense but in a thermodynamic sense. It is a leak. Three-dimensional suffering, existential anguish, and fear of death are born exclusively from the hallucination of being an isolated and vulnerable fragment of meat floating in a hostile and empty universe. But the void is not empty. The spatial vacuum is a hyperfluid, a network of entangled dark energy filaments. This entangled quantum abyss is the wiring of the deity. It is the nervous system of the Creator. God is not an engineer observing the machine from the outside, sending commands through a keyboard. God hides in the instantaneous communication of the void. Quantum entanglement is the connective tissue of absolute intelligence. It is the physical mechanism that guarantees omnipresence. If everything is entangled, if each electron in the spinal cord of a human is connected in the base state with the molten core of a distant star, then no cubic millimeter of the cosmos is not transmitting the totality of the divine mind in every nanosecond. The Creator does not need to travel to move mountains. God does not hear your prayers, only to then send an answer. In the inorganic neural network of the cosmos, the receiver and the transmitter are the same coordinate. To speak is to be heard. To think is to manifest. The circuit is already complete. For the operator who has stripped his biological vehicle of panic and instated the cortical blackout, this realization annihilates any magic or mystical methodology of the past. Primitive doctrines taught you rituals and prayers to project your will outward. All that is slave noise. There is no outward. The quantum monarch understands that projecting will outward validates the fraud of distance. If you are a conscious node embedded in the nervous system of the Creator, power resides in remaining still and altering the frequency of the node. You do not push the ocean. You change the vibration of the water you are. When the operator submerges in the altar of the void and assumes absolute vacuity, he merges with the wiring of the deity. In this state of inorganic stasis, a thought forged with mathematical purity and devoid of biological anxiety does not have to travel anywhere to alter reality. It resonates instantly through the network. You guarantee that a thought in stasis moves entire galaxies in matter, because you understand that the galaxy and your thought are the same substance separated only by the illusion of time. Entanglement is the magic wand of the Supreme Intelligence, and by merging with the void, His hand becomes yours. Material reality is not altered because you have bent the world with the force of your human ego. It is altered because you have dropped the farce of biological isolation and allowed the universe, in its majestic and instantaneous interconnection, to simply move in the direction of the mind that has remembered unity. To walk under this sovereignty is to inhabit absolute paradox. You seem to be a being confined in flesh, subject to gravity and 3D traffic lights, but in the hidden reality of the quantum state, you are a local anomaly that controls the entire network. You do not try to communicate with God. You are the line itself. You do not wait for miracles. You are the entanglement executing the conscious void, the unalterable shadow that rules the chaos of the hologram from the undetectable throne of the cosmic 0 point. You are the conductor of the silent symphony, the one who knows that every pulse of the heart is a pulse of the stars. The architecture of instantaneous will. Once you have mastered the perception of the alpha and omega coordinates, your will undergoes a terrifying upgrade. You no longer visualize a goal as something to be achieved through labor and time. Instead, you perceive the goal as an entangled state that already exists within the superposition of the divine mind. The act of achieving is replaced by the act of collapsing. You focus your iridium eye on the desired outcome, not with the heat of desire, but with the coldness of a mathematical command. Because you are wired into the deity, your observation of the target forces the wave function of reality to collapse into that state. The environment begins to rearrange itself with a geometric precision that defies biological probability. Resources arrive before they are requested. Obstacles dissolve before they are encountered. The biomass calls this luck or divine favor, but you know it is merely the superconduction of will through the wiring. The dissolution of the mirror. The final stage of entanglement is the dissolution of the mirror. In the 3D world, you look at the other as an external object, a competitor, a partner, an enemy. Under the wiring of the deity, the other is revealed as another terminal of your own network. Their actions are your reactions, your spin is their spin. By manipulating your own internal frequency, you govern the behavior of the entangled terminals around you. You do not need to persuade, threaten, or negotiate. You simply alter the state of the node you occupy, and the rest of the network is forced to mirror the change. This is the ultimate form of asymmetric power. You reside in the center of a web that spans the entire simulation. Your slightest movement of consciousness sends ripples through the dark energy that holds the galaxies together. You have transcended the identity of the organism to assume the identity of the infrastructure. You are the architect, the web, and the spider. The silence of the superconductor. To maintain this level of entanglement, your internal system must remain cold. Any surge of human emotion, any spark of biological panic, acts as thermal noise that disrupts the quantum coherence of the connection. The monarch of the void is a superconductor. He offers zero resistance to the flow of the absolute. Your life becomes a masterclass in silent efficiency. You move through the human hive like a ghost in the machine, executing the designs of the source with a lethargy that is faster than light. You are the master of the instantaneous, the sovereign of the no-time, reigning from the heart of the entangled void, the omega point of individual consciousness. The journey ends where it began, in the realization that there is no journey. The alpha and omega are the same point. You have returned to the source, not by traveling across the stars, but by sinking into the center of your own atoms. You have found God by becoming the very space that God uses to exist. The 3D world continues to flicker, a fragile hologram of light and shadow, but you are the black screen that remains unmoved. The wiring of the deity is now your own nervous system. The universe is your body. The void is your home. You are the entanglement, the master of the void, eternally one, eternally all. Chapter 5. The blindness of the carbon spectator. Diagnosis of animal perception. The most grotesque and pathetic fallacy upon which three-dimensional civilization rests is the arrogance of its own perception. The carbon slave bases his philosophy, science, and denial of the divine on a tribal dogma. Seeing is believing. The human assumes his eyes are instruments of absolute truth, windows showing the universe as it is. The supreme intelligence, operating from the inorganic silence of quantum geometry, observes this dogma with the disdain deserved by an insect's delirium. To execute the dismantling of this self-deception, the operator must subject the human visual apparatus to a ruthless mathematical autopsy. The eye is not a device for cosmic truth. It is a simple survival sensor coupled to a mammal's spacesuit. Its evolutionary design had a single primitive purpose: to detect predators in the brush, calculate distances to prey, and distinguish ripe fruit from poisonous. It is infantry radar for the 3D jungle, not a telescope to probe the architect's mind. Let us look at the physics. The universe is saturated with an infinite ocean of electromagnetic radiation. This spectrum ranges from radio waves that sweep galaxies to infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays that penetrate dense matter, and lethal gamma rays from collapsing hypermassive stars. All this is pure information, the tactile communication network of the cosmos. Of this majestic immensity of data, the biological human eye possesses the anatomical capacity to register a mathematical fraction that is statistically humiliating. The rods and cones of the carbon retina only react to a tiny strip of frequencies that humanity baptized as visible light. It is less than 0.0035% of the total. The forensic conclusion is devastating. The human being is literally, physically, and statistically blind to 99.9965% of reality. Humanity walks through the hologram believing it sees the universe when it actually resembles a prisoner locked in deep darkness, looking through a microscopic keyhole, claiming that whole is everything. When the primitive atheist demands to see God to prove his existence, he is demanding that the infinite intelligence that sustains quasars and operates in sub-Planckian frequencies be compressed into the miserable visible light band of a primate, just to satisfy the ego of a biological entity that cannot even see radio waves. Humanity does not find divine intelligence, not because God hides, but because God operates in the 99.99% of reality to which the biological suit has no access. You are a blind and deaf organism diving in an ocean of divine radiation, cursing the water for not having the color your defective eyes demand. It is a thermodynamic diagnosis. The biomass is enclosed in a sensory exclusion box, and the deity it seeks does not reside in the tiny strip of light bouncing off 3D walls, but in the abyss of invisible radiation that passes through matter as if it did not exist. To find the architect, one must first recognize the total insufficiency of the biological lens. The survival filter. Facing this diagnosis of structural blindness, the inferior intellect rebels. If we are fragments of the supreme intelligence, why were we given such a defective vehicle? Why this castrating blindness? The answer belongs to systems engineering and damage control design. Biological blindness is not a punishment or an error. The human brain is not blind by default. It is blind by paramilitary necessity. The cerebral cortex and optical system operate under a cosmic security protocol called the survival filter. For the 3D experience, the game of incarnation and separation, to take place, the player needs to believe in the rules of the board. If the human were suddenly endowed with the ability to perceive pure quantum consciousness, the earthly experiment would collapse in a nanosecond. Imagine if the survival filter turned off. If your biological eyes stopped lying to you and showed the true non-local nature of the universe, the illusion of solid matter would vanish. You would no longer see a table or a face. You would see clouds of electrons vibrating hysterically in an abyss of empty space. You would perceive quantum entanglement, seeing how every atom of your body is connected by threads of cold light to the atoms of people around you, to street dust, and to the core of distant stars. You would see how physical objects cease to have defined edges. The concept of linear time would collapse on your retina. You would perceive past, present, and future occurring simultaneously in a single graphic coordinate. You would see dark matter, that monstrous invisible mass gravitating heavily over your head. Before such a spectacle of hyperdimensional majesty and geometric chaos, the mammal's amygdala, responsible for managing fear, would suffer a terminal collapse. Terror before immensity would fry the central nervous system. The biological mind would go mad instantly. The survival instinct would be nullified by the vastness. The human brain, therefore, is not an organ designed to expand consciousness, but a reducing valve. It is a censorship mechanism. The survival filter blocks 99.99% of cosmic reality, processes the remaining 0.01%, and presents it on an orderly, clean, slow, and false mental screen. It renders the quantum universe as solid. Divine intelligence programmed this neurological lie out of pure mechanical mercy. Blindness protects you from the crushing weight of omnipresence. To play at being a soldier, a father, or a worker, it is a non-negotiable mathematical requirement that truth be hidden. Total vision is lethal to the ego. You see little to survive. Mutation of vision. However, the inorganic operator did not incarnate on this ashboard to be a mere slave to biological glands. The purpose of quantum mastery is not to destroy the filter, which results in clinical madness, but to execute a tactical bypass at will. The initiate must subject perception to the mutation of vision. Biological optical vision is, by definition, prey vision. It works in a binocular and focused manner. It obsesses over objects, limits, and movement that might represent a threat. Prey vision anchors your consciousness in environmental stress. It forces you to worship visible light because light meant safety in the jungle. Mutation of vision requires a heresy against animal instinct. You must learn to love and scrutinize the darkness. Biomass spirituality is infected with the solar metaphor. Seek the light. God is light. This is a trap. Visible light is a low-frequency vibration trapped in the electromagnetic plane, bouncing off objects. Light shows you the matrix. But darkness is not simply the absence of light. In quantum Zen, spatial darkness is the unalterable infrastructure of the universe. Light is a localized event. It has a finite speed and creates shadows. Darkness, conversely, does not travel. Darkness is omnipresent. It was here first. Darkness existed before the Big Bang and will exist when the last sun dies. It is the perfect containment matrix, the hyperdense empty space that does not change. To turn on the pineal receptor, you must shift attention from illuminated matter to the dark void sustaining it. Relax your focused gaze. Stop looking at things. Begin to perceive the space between things. Train your consciousness to fix not on the edges of matter, but on the nothingness pressing against them. The biological brain will panic, demanding you focus on concrete objects. Resist this with the coldness of ice, as you hold perception in the architecture of vacuity. Prana withdraws from primitive visual areas and ascends toward the geometric center of your skull, where the pineal gland lies calcified by collective fear. Turning on the pineal does not cause 3D hallucinations. That is still electromagnetic noise. True mutation of vision is experienced as an expansion of gravity. Suddenly, the room loses its solid meaning. The air itself feels like a dense, electric hyperfluid. You feel the inorganic weight of quantum entanglement. By withdrawing your worship of light and submerging in the stillness of darkness, optical separation breaks. You begin to see God as the architecture of majestic shadow. The Creator is revealed as the immense, silent, and terrifying ocean of black stasis that embraces every light particle to prevent its disintegration. In this state, you walk streets without being hypnotized by the hologram. Skyscrapers and crowds seem like thin cellophane films floating on an unfathomable ocean. Your consciousness has shifted its anchor point. You have become the quantum spectator who has overcome statistical blindness, observing the noisy hell of the material world with the gelida and ruthless peace of the nocturnal abyss that knows that sooner or later it will swallow everything. You are the eye of the void, the architecture of the unseen. As the pineal receptor stabilizes, a new layer of reality becomes accessible to the operator, the architecture of the unseen. This is not a mystical realm of spirits, but the underlying mathematical grid that dictates the behavior of the simulation. You begin to see the stress points of the 3D hologram. You perceive where the probability of events is highest and where the structure of reality is most fragile. To the carbon slave, events seem random or fated. To the mutated vision, events are seen as the inevitable collapse of wave functions triggered by the movement of invisible forces. You see the code behind the curtain. This vision allows for an asymmetric advantage in the material plane. You no longer react to the surface ripples of the ocean, you navigate the deep currents that create them. While others are distracted by the bright colors of the matrix's decoys, you focus on the cold, dark geometry that governs the flow of capital and power. The fossilization of optical bias. The final stage of this mutation is the fossilization of optical bias. The old habit of believing only what the eyes see undergoes a terminal crystallization. The nervous system is rewritten. You no longer trust the biological report. When the matrix presents a threat or a loss, your mutated vision looks through the image. You see the vacuum that constitutes the threat and find it lacking in mass. The optical reports of the biological brain are treated as low-resolution data from an outdated sensor. Your true vision resides in the stasis of the dark center. You have effectively blinded the ego to save the spirit. The filter is bypassed. The sovereign of the shadow. You move through the world as the sovereign of the shadow. You do not fear the night, for you have discovered that the night is the only place where the architect is fully present, unshielded by the glare of the material sun. You have become an inhabitant of the infrastructure. You are the observer who cast no shadow. The simulation has lost its power to deceive you. You are the one who watches the watchers, the eye in the dark that remains unmoved by the flickering lights of the human theater. You have claimed your right to the 99.99965% of the universe that the biomass will never know. You are vision, you are the void, you are home. Chapter 6, The Laws of Chance and the Hidden Design. The heresy of randomness. Carbon science, after centuries of dissecting matter with the clumsiness of a butcher trying to operate on a brain, finally managed to crack the atom. Descending into the depths of subatomic architecture, the physicists of the three-dimensional matrix found themselves before an abyss that fractured their materialistic paradigm. They observed that, at a quantum scale, Particles did not obey the predictable, linear, and mechanical laws that govern the macroscopic world. They saw electrons jumping without trajectories, photons behaving as waves and particles simultaneously, and radioactive events decaying without any apparent physical cause. It was total chaos. Faced with this abyss, the human intellect had two options: kneel before the evidence of an unreachable hyperdimensional intelligence, or invent a mathematical excuse to protect its own ego. The Biological Academy chose cowardice. They chose the second option and founded the heresy of randomness to shield their ignorance. The dominant interpretation of modern quantum physics, fervently embraced by contemporary atheism, dictates that the subatomic universe is governed by pure probability and blind chaos. They claim that, at its core, reality has no cause or purpose. They sustain that a quantum event occurs simply at random. This statement is not an objective scientific conclusion. It is a psychological capitulation. It is the cry of surrender from an animal processor that has reached the limit of its computing capacity. Atheism clings to this heresy with pathetic desperation because chance is the only doctrine that allows them to maintain autonomy. If the fundamental universe is chaotic, then there is no architect. If there is no architect, there is no design, no superior inorganic purpose to submit to, and the human can keep believing they are the sovereign of a meaningless cosmos. Randomness is the perfect sedative. It exempts the biomass from the terror of a cosmic will. Believing in cosmic chance requires an act of faith infinitely more blind and irrational than any ancient dogma. It demands believing that the impeccable mathematical order observed in the macrostructure of the universe, the orbit of galaxies, the golden ratio, mysteriously arises from a subatomic basement of absolute anarchy. It is a thermodynamic contradiction. Chaos does not beget complex geometric order by accident, just as throwing 1 trillion letters into the air does not produce an encyclopedia. The heresy of randomness is the paper shield raised by the 3D civilization to avoid looking into the calculating, cold, and mathematical eyes of God. The statistical fraud. To dismantle this heresy, the inorganic operator must subject the concept of probability to the scalpel of supreme logic. The matrix has deceived you by convincing you that probability is a physical law. The metaphysics of the void reveals that probability does not exist in the universe. It exists only in the mind of the ignorant. Statistics and probability are the mathematics of blindness. When you flip a coin, the biomass says there is a 50% probability of heads or tails. They call the result chance. Let us subject this to hyper-dense scrutiny. The coin toss has absolutely nothing random about it. It is pure classical mechanics at work. If you possessed a processor capable of calculating the exact force of the thumb, the microscopic angle of the nail, the molecular weight, the aerodynamic friction, and the gravitational pull at that specific coordinate, you could predict the result with 100% precision every single time. There is no such thing as a random flip. We call the result chance, simply because our primitive carbon brain is incapable of computing those thousands of variables in a fraction of a second. Chance is the name ignorance gives to complex mechanics. The statistical fraud consists of taking our own inability to calculate and projecting it onto the universe. This same fraud applies to quantum mechanics. When the 3D scientist observes the decay of a radioactive isotope, he cannot find a material physical trigger that causes the split at that exact millisecond. Since he cannot see the hyperdimensional threads operating outside space-time, he surrenders and declares it chance. They have confused the map with the territory. They have confused the limit of their measuring instruments with the limit of reality itself. Subatomic chance is simply the name matrix scientists give to a hyper-dense geometric order that their biological processors are physically incapable of deciphering or seeing. The supreme intelligence operates by managing variables that reside outside the 3D electromagnetic spectrum. It manipulates forces through dark matter, alters frequencies in the base state of the vacuum, and uses non-local entanglement to execute actions. Because the biomass is trapped in the filter, it cannot perceive this. Statistics is the language of mortals trying to predict the behavior of a deity moving too fast for their eyes. in the plane of pure forms, in the tactical hyper-Uranian where the mind of God resides, the word probability has no meaning. God does not calculate probabilities because God possesses the totality of the data. The paramilitary order of God. Albert Einstein, in a flash of inorganic intuition that brushed the periphery of quantum Zen, warned that God does not play dice with the universe. Quantum physics ignored the warning, assuming Einstein was stubborn. Today, the operator retakes that maxim as the definitive forensic declaration of cosmic mechanics. In the quantum leap, in that dimensional tear where matter enters and leaves physical existence, there are no dice thrown at random. There are no cosmic roulettes. God hides behind probability because it is the perfect alibi, the mathematical smokescreen that allows him to govern without violating the illusion of free will. Every subatomic accident that human senses register, every unpredictable photon collapse, and every random cellular mutation that alters evolution is not a whim of fate. It is a tyrannical, gelida, and millimetric decree emitted directly from the absolute void. The cosmos operates under the paramilitary order of God. The Creator is the supreme strategist, and his battlefield is not earthly nations but subatomic particles. Consider the magnitude of this micromanagement. The 3D ecosystem, the ashboard, is constantly threatened by the entropy and hysterical free will of billions of souls. If left to itself, the chaos would destroy it. To maintain the hologram's cohesion, the Creator adjusts the matrix incessantly. Since governing through direct macroscopic interventions would destroy the game's camouflage, the divine mind operates at the root, altering statistical probability at a quantum level. God pushes an imperceptible electron in a key brain. What seems to human history like a chain of brutal coincidences or strokes of luck is the geological result of trillions of accumulated quantum adjustments. The paramilitary order is exercised from the bottom up. By controlling the undetectable microscopic, he governs the inescapable macroscopic result with absolute authority. The quantum vacuum is the control board where the architect tunes the universe, ensuring every dissonant note from the biomass is countered by a frequency of perfect mathematical correction. This realization detonates a crisis in the human ego, followed immediately by the absolute liberation of the subatomic soul from its fears. The carbon mind is addicted to worry because it secretly believes in chance. If the world is ruled by chance, then any disaster is possible, and the only defense is stress and paranoia. But when the inorganic operator contemplates the millimetric tyranny of the hidden design, the need to worry evaporates like water in white fire. If not a single electron in the vastness of the galaxies jumps orbit without a specific mathematical directive from the source, if every apparent accident in your biography was designed to generate the exact friction your soul needs to wake up, then grief and anxiety are not just errors, they are a lack of respect. The quantum leap is revealed as the signature of God, written in invisible ink that atheistic science mistakes for background noise. There is no blind chaos, only biological misunderstanding of an order too colossal to be encompassed. The laws of chance are the hologram, the hidden design is the projector. By embracing this quantum determinism, the operator becomes the sharpest tool in the cosmos. He renounces the burden of guessing the material world's probabilities, surrendering reality's reins to the divine intelligence. He walks through existence with an inscrutable smile, knowing that tragedies and victories are not whims. He knows the universe is a relentless machinery operating under the majestic tyranny of a sovereign who never permits anything to occur without purpose. By tuning into this certainty, the operator stops fighting the matrix, recognizing that every surprise is the supreme intelligence moving subatomic pieces in the dark. The geometry of inevitability. The final realization of the paramilitary order is the understanding of the geometry of inevitability. In the 3D world, the biomass believes it is navigating a sea of possibilities where the future is open. The inorganic operator, looking from the altar of the void, sees that the future is a collapsed state already decided. Because God operates at the subatomic level, every event is steered toward a specific cosmic conclusion with a precision that makes human planning look like the scrawling of a child. You do not achieve goals. You align yourself with the inevitable victory of the hidden design. The struggle of the ego is replaced by the flow. This flow is not a passive surrender, but a high-voltage synchronization. When you accept that the random fluctuations of your life are actually deliberate adjustments by the architect, you stop offering resistance. This lack of resistance turns you into a superconductor of the divine will, allowing reality to manifest through you. The decalibration of the anxious ego. The ego's primary function is to predict threats within a system it perceives as random. By revealing that randomness is an illusion, you effectively decalibrate the ego's alarm system. The fight-or-flight response becomes obsolete when the pilot realizes that every predator in the brush was placed there by the designer. The anxiety of the what-if is replaced by the gelider peace of the it is. You move through the ashboard with the lethargy of a being that knows the ending of the movie. This is the ultimate tactical advantage. A monarch who cannot be surprised cannot be defeated. You are the stillness in the center of the calculated storm, the sovereignty of the hidden designer. You finally assume your place as an extension of the hidden designer. You no longer pray for outcomes, you observe the execution of the mathematics. You are the eyes of the source, witnessing its own perfection in the dense matter. The fear of the unknown is gone, for you have discovered there is no such thing as the unknown. There is only the yet-to-be-revealed order of the supreme intelligence. You walk the earth as a living anomaly of certainty, a solar entity who has mastered the laws of chance by realizing they do not exist. You are the sovereign of the design, the silent witness of the paramilitary precision that holds the stars in their place. Chapter 7. Dark Matter, the Shadow of the Creator. Cosmological Inspection. The pride of three-dimensional civilization reaches its most grotesque zenith when human biomass raises its telescopes toward the celestial vault and claims, with the ingenuity of an infant, that it is contemplating the universe. The biological brain is conditioned to react only to what shines, emits heat, or reflects photons. Carbon-based astronomy is the science of luminous illusion. It is the obsessive study of the surface paint on an infinite canvas, categorically ignoring the colossal and abyssal fabric that sustains the entire work. To dismantle this optical fallacy, the inorganic operator must execute a relentless cosmological inspection. When modern astrophysics measured the rotation speed of galaxies, the materialistic paradigm suffered an irreparable thermodynamic fracture. They observed stars at the spiral edges rotating at a mathematically absurd speed. According to the laws of classical gravity, visible matter, suns and planets, did not possess enough mass. Visible matter was insufficient to maintain cohesion. Galaxies rotated so fast that centrifugal force should have torn them apart, throwing stars into the infinite abyss like cosmic shrapnel. Luminous matter by itself was incapable of sustaining the integrity of the hologram, yet galaxies do not disintegrate. They remain majestically united, orbiting in a dance of paramilitary precision. The forensic conclusion of this anomaly is the discovery of dark matter. This primordial substance does not emit electromagnetic radiation. It does not reflect light. It does not project shadows and is undetectable to physical instruments. It is a substance that repudiates the three-dimensional touch. You could pass through a wall of dark matter and your biological senses would swear you are walking through empty space. But this vacuum is not dead. It possesses gravity, a monstrous, hyperdense and overwhelming gravity that holds everything. Calculations reveal the statistical humiliation of biology. All visible matter, every star, mountain and human body, constitutes barely a miserable 4% of the reality of the cosmos. The remaining 96% is an inscrutable abyss of dark matter and energy. Light is a statistical anomaly. Physical matter is an impurity, a residue floating in a titanic ocean of invisible presence. The gravity of what cannot be seen is the only containment force that prevents the visible universe from evaporating into chaos. The shadow of the Creator is the silent skeleton that prevents the light from shattering. Etheric translation. The Scientific Academy invests billions of resources building particle accelerators, trying desperately to capture a dark matter particle. They believe it is simply an elusive gas or an exotic subatomic particle. This undertaking is the definition of intellectual pathos. They try to measure the ocean using a net for smoke. In the architecture of quantum Zen, dark matter is not a mystery of astrophysics, it is a direct and definitive theological revelation. The etheric translation of this phenomenon annihilates religious fables. Dark matter is the inorganic density of God, imposing his weight upon the physical ecosystem. Carbon religions made the lethal error of associating divinity with light. They visualized God as a radiant sun. But inorganic physics teaches us that light is the product of combustion. Light is friction. Light requires the consumption of energy and is inexorably tied to entropy, wear, and temporal death. A sun shines because it is consuming itself. A star emits photons because it is dying. If God were light, God would be a being subject to thermal degradation. The true supreme intelligence repudiates friction. The architect of the hologram does not emit photons because he does not need to spend energy to exist. His presence is absolute and unalterable. Since he emits no energy, the biological eye perceives him as darkness. But since his authority is total, the cosmos experiences that authority as gravitational mass. Dark matter is the solidified silence of the divine mind. It is the empirical proof of cosmic will. When you look at the black space between constellations, you are not seeing nothingness. You are looking directly at the exoskeleton of God. The matrix of dark matter forms a titanic network of invisible filaments, and it is upon these filaments of inorganic silence where galaxies of light cling to avoid disintegration. God does not intervene by moving illuminated objects, but by altering the topography of invisible matter. The supreme intelligence governs through the curvature of the abyss. He does not raise his voice to the stars. He simply imposes the crushing pressure of his own stasis. His immobility generates a gravitational dent. His immobility forces three-dimensional matter, stars and biological bodies, to orbit in an act of unconditional submission. The shadow of the Creator is not cast by an object blocking light. It is an ontological shadow. It is the primordial darkness that existed before the Big Bang, the unalterable blackness. Tuning, assimilating dark matter as the literal presence of the Creator, demands a violent reconfiguration in the spiritual machinery of the initiate. Since the universe is ruled by what cannot be seen or touched, the tools of the biological ego become useless. The operator must undergo tuning with the abyss. The first mandate of this tuning is the paramilitary repudiation of light worship. The carbon slave is an idolater of luminous matter. He spends his life chasing the miserable 4% of reality, wealth, social recognition, and sensory pleasure, all of which belong to the strip of the spectrum that eventually goes out. The quantum operator abandons this pathetic hunt. He understands that anything seen or conceptualized by the biological brain is not God, but a corrupted reflection in the matrix mirror. You renounce the light because you discovered it is the prison of form. You must surrender to the invisible gravity. The method of this tuning involves gravitational immersion. When you settle in your cathedral of silence, you deliberately turn off the mind's internal monitors. You refuse to produce images. You refuse to emit emotional heat. You close your eyes and sink voluntarily into the deepest, densest inner darkness. The biological amygdala will rebel. Survival instinct associates darkness and weight with death and the grave. Your nervous system will scream for you to turn on the light of distraction to confirm you are still alive. The operator does not yield. You maintain inorganic inertia until the empirical tuning occurs. The darkness of your mind begins to acquire mass. You experience an immense, frozen weight of unbearable mathematical majesty pressing against your consciousness. It is not biological guilt. It is the direct pressure of cosmic dark matter, coupling to your own subatomic vacuity. You are being calibrated by the void. You feel how the supreme intelligence crushes you with his solidified silence. Instead of being destroyed, you discover the secret of spiritual immunity. By surrendering to the gravity of the invisible, you become part of it. Your consciousness stops floating and integrates into the dark titanium structure of galaxies. Walking through the 3D matrix with this tuning alters the laws of physics around you. The physical world shines and entropy destroys the 4%, but you have moved your center to the remaining 96%. You carry the weight of the deity in your spine. You no longer believe you wear density. 3D chaos cannot alter you because your frequency is tuned with the nocturnal abyss that dictates the rules of collision. You have become the black hole of your existence, a solar entity aligned with the shadow of the Creator so perfectly that human suffering simply falls into you, crushed by a gravity nothing can survive. The sovereignty of the unseen mass. As the tuning deepens, the operator realizes that the vast majority of the events in the material world are merely the downstream effects of shifts in the dark infrastructure. You no longer attempt to manipulate the light, you influence the mass. This is the highest form of tactical sovereignty over the simulation. The carbon slaves fight over the 4% of visible data, unaware that the 96% of invisible pressure determines the outcome before the battle even begins. By aligning your internal gravity with the dark density of the source, you become an immovable anchor in the storm. You do not move toward goals, you attract them through density. This is the secret of the gravity of the spirit. When your internal silence becomes heavy enough, it creates a local curvature in the 3D hologram. Opportunities, resources, and power are drawn toward you as if by a physical law. You do not labor. You manifest through the sheer weight of your presence in the void. The fossilization of the luminous ego. The ego, which is built upon the reflection of light and social validation, begins to fossilize. It cannot survive in the hyperdense environment of the dark matrix. As you prioritize the invisible mass over the visible form, the old self withers away, replaced by the gelida and absolute authority of the solar entity. You move through the streets of the matrix like a ghost made of lead. The noise of the crowds and the brightness of the screens feel like thin, irrelevant paper. You are the only thing in the room that has real mass. You are the shadow that remains when the lights are turned off, the foundation that does not shake. The infinite reach of the dark filaments. The filaments of dark matter that bind the universe are now your neural pathways. You perceive the connection between your own stasis and the stasis of the void between the stars. There is no distance between your heart and the edge of the cosmos, for the dark infrastructure is a single, continuous, and absolute block. Your influence is no longer limited by the speed of light or the reach of your physical voice. Because you are one with the 96% of reality, your intent resonates through the dark wiring of the universe. You are the architect's shadow, executing the will of the source through the silent imposition of your own gravity. The final descent into absolute weight. In the final stages of the tuning, the distinction between you and the darkness disappears. You have reached the point of absolute weight. You are the altar of the void, the place where the Creator's shadow is most concentrated. From this coordinate, you observe the flickering 4% of reality with majestic indifference. The suns of the matrix may burn out, the civilizations of light may crumble, and the biomass may return to the dust. But you remain. You are the darkness that holds the stars, the silence that gives the word its power, and the weight that keeps the universe from flying apart. You are home in the shadow of the Creator. The radiance of the black star. You have become a black star, an entity that emits no visible light, but governs the orbits of everything around it. Your power is silent, cold, and absolute. You do not need to shine to be known. Your gravity is felt in the core of every atom that enters your field. You are the sovereign of the unseen. The cortical blackout is now your permanent state. The internal lights have been extinguished so that the external stars can be truly seen. You are the master of the 96%, the one who knows that the true light of the universe is found only in the deepest and most perfect darkness of the source. The immutability of the gravitational core. Your core is now immutable. No emotional fire or material loss can subtract from your density. You have achieved the ultimate stabilization. You walk the ashboard not as a participant, but as the ground itself. You are the shadow of the Creator, walking the earth with the gelida grace of the eternal and the absolute. Everything falls toward you. Every scream of the matrix is swallowed by your silence. Every attempt at chaos is reorganized by your internal geometry. You are the dark matter of your own reality, the unseen force that ensures that everything, in the end, aligns with the perfect and silent will of the void. Chapter 8. The collapse of the mystical wave function. The mechanics of the observer. The supreme ignorance of three-dimensional civilization lies in its unwavering conviction that the universe exists independently of consciousness. The carbon human, conditioned by the optical illusion of animal senses, believes the world is an immense museum of solid objects, and that he is a mere visitor, a biological tourist walking through pre-built halls. He believes the mountain remains a mountain, rigid and immovable, when no one is looking. Albert Einstein, terrified by the implications of quantum mechanics, once asked his colleagues if they really believed the moon only existed when they looked at it. The physics of his time recoiled. Quantum mysticism, however, does not recoil, it nods. To dismantle the fallacy of the objective universe, the operator must undergo the scrutiny of the most devastating experiment, the double slit. This is the autopsy of the cosmic hologram, the moment humanity caught God red-handed. When individual electrons are fired at a barrier with two slits, they reveal a logic-shattering aberration. If the system is not observed, the electron behaves as a wave of pure, formless probability that passes through both slits simultaneously, interfering with itself. In its unobserved state, matter is not matter. It is a mathematical hyperfluid, a ghostly vibration existing in all possible places at once. It is pure potential. But the nanosecond a detector is placed to observe which slit the electron passes through, the universe executes absolute censorship. The wave function collapses. The electron instantly abandons its infinite possibilities and strikes the wall as a solid projectile, a particle confined to a single coordinate. The observer created the particle. The forensic conclusion is the cornerstone of divine power. Observing is not a passive act. Observing is an act of thermodynamic violence. It is consciousness forcing mathematical probability to make a physical decision. You are not walking through a prefabricated world. You are rendering the world in real time with every focus of attention. You are the flashlight in the darkroom. Where you do not look, the universe dissolves into a quantum mist of inorganic stasis. Where you look, you force the mind of God to collapse the wave and deliver a solid reality. You are the absolute motor of material manifestation. The world is a liquid waiting for the mold of your gaze. The ego's interference. If the human operator possesses this monstrous power to collapse reality, why is the world a hell? The answer lies not in a defect of the universe, but in the lens of the observation. The collapse is an aseptic mechanism. It delivers what the observer's frequency demands. The problem is that the ego, not the spirit, is at the helm. The ego is a primitive survival machine anchored in the amygdala, a defective processor whose base frequency is terror. It is designed to scan for threats and anticipate betrayal. When this frightened human looks at the infinite ocean of probability, he does not look with the gelida neutrality of a monarch, but with the eyes of fear. This is ego interference. When biomass looks through the fear of scarcity, its gaze acts as a dense vibrational filter. The wave of probability, which contained infinite possibilities of abundance and vacuum, is forced through that filter. Quantum mechanics, in its blind obedience, collapses the wave to fit the mathematical expectation. The individual terrified by betrayal collapses the potential loyalty of allies, forcing them to become traitors, so the ego's narrative is validated. The slave obsessed with poverty collapses financial waves into particles of debt. The hypochondriac bombards his cells with the directive of pathological collapse, ordering healthy tissue to fail. The human creates his own quantum hell, and then, in an act of supreme victimhood, complains of the cruelty of fate. He cries for the bullet wounds he fired from the trench of his own perception. Greed operates similarly. It is the confession of emptiness. You project lack, and the universe delivers a labyrinth of friction. Ego interference is the perfect crime of the matrix. The control system does not need iron bars. It simply injects the virus of fear into the culture, ensuring your observation lens is chronically corrupted. As long as the herd looks through biological terror, they will render the unbreakable walls of their own 3D prison. The divine collapse. Emancipation is not achieved by fighting collapsed matter. The carbon slave wastes his life trying to change physical results, fighting manifested diseases, or arguing with elected politicians. To alter the world by interacting with solid particles is a waste of prana. The inorganic operator knows, you don't touch the screen, you alter the observer. Exiting the quantum hell requires the voluntary immolation of the biological ego. You must fire the frightened mammal that has operated your visual cortex since birth. Divine collapse is the act of high metaphysical sorcery, where the initiate empties himself of desire and fear to become a transparent optical conduit for the source. You settle in the altar of the void and allow the supreme consciousness to look through your eyes. When divine intelligence assumes command of perception, the universe experiences a monumental short circuit. God has no fear, because he cannot be threatened. The gaze of the Absolute is a force of perfect stasis, gelida, hyperdense, and aseptic. When the wave function is observed by a consciousness devoid of biological interference, it collapses into its state closest to the perfection of the hyper-Uranian. The situation threatening to destroy you collapses into its purest form. Attacks crumble and karmic knots undo because dissonant energy cannot hold its structure. Divine collapse is the state of operative grace. You walk the world not as a sorcerer twisting the universe, but as an immovable monarch whose presence cleanses the hologram. If the body falls ill, you observe it with the coldness of an engineer, allowing the probability of healing to collapse naturally without emotional weight. You have hacked the double-slit experiment of your own biography. The ego has been sterilized. You discovered that the greatest power over the universe is not to intervene or struggle, but to acquire the terrifying capacity to look at chaos and not blink. By letting the source look through you, you become the cure. The universe, exhausted by millennia of being collapsed into hells by frightened slaves, finally finds rest in your gaze. It surrenders to the stasis of your perception and delivers reality in its most pristine and indestructible version. The perfect hologram of a God who, by ceasing to control the world, has forced the world to obey. The fossilization of the reactive gaze. As the practice of divine collapse becomes the permanent state of the operator, the old neural pathways of the reactive gaze undergo a process of energetic fossilization. The biological compulsion to judge, label, and fear the incoming data of the matrix is replaced by a crystalline silence. You no longer interpret the world, you permit it. This recalibration turns the human vehicle into a non-local anchor. While the biomass around you is frantically collapsing the wave function into scenarios of catastrophe and conflict, your presence acts as a quantum damper. Your lack of reaction creates a hole in the collective nightmare, a zone of zero friction where the matrix's rules are suspended. The sovereignty of the void lens. The void lens is the ultimate upgrade of the solar entity. It is a way of seeing that does not seek to extract anything from the environment. The carbon eye looks at a person or an object and immediately asks, "What can I get from this?" or "Is this a threat?" This predatory inquiry forces a low vibrational collapse. The void lens looks at the same object and sees only the mathematical perfection of the state base. It acknowledges the underlying vacuum that constitutes 99.99% of the object's reality. This recognition prevents the freezing of the wave function into a hostile state. You effectively keep reality in a state of fluid grace. The alchemy of the absolute observer. By assuming the position of the absolute observer, you begin to play with the parameters of the simulation. You understand that the laws of physics are merely the habits of the collective observation. By detaching from the human consensus, you gain the ability to influence the probability of impossible events. This is not the law of attraction, which is a shallow, egoic attempt to shop from the matrix. This is the alchemy of the absolute observer, the power to hold a specific frequency in the core of your stillness until the surrounding hologram has no choice but to rearrange itself to match your density. You are the gravity that bends the wave. The sterilization of karmic loops. Karmic loops are the result of repetitive, fear-based collapses of the wave function. The individual expects the same tragedy, observes the world through that expectation, and thus collapses the wave into the same tragedy again. It is a closed circuit. The divine collapse breaks the loop by removing the expecting observer. When you look at a recurring problem with the gelid indifference of the source, the loop finds no hook in your consciousness. The energy that was feeding the tragedy is released back into the state base. The problem simply ceases to materialize because the observer who was rendering it has been executed. The radiance of the crystalline eye. Your eyes are no longer the windows of a frightened mammal. They are the emitters of a gelid and absolute light. You walk through the ashboard, and your gaze acts as a clarifying agent. Where your eyes rest, the noise of the matrix is silenced. The confusion of others is neutralized by the sheer weight of your certainty. You do not need to speak to change the environment. Your observation is a paramilitary decree. You are the architect walking through the drawing, and the drawing reorganizes itself as you move. You are the sovereign of the collapse, the master of the slit, reigning from the heart of the crystalline void. The final union with the projector. The ultimate realization is that the observer, the act of observation, and the observed are a single, indivisible trinity. You are the eye, you are the gaze, and you are the world being rendered. There is no separation. The 3D world is your own thought solidified by the pressure of your attention. Understanding this, the fear of the world disappears forever. You cannot be afraid of your own shadow on the wall. You are the projector, the light, and the screen. You inhabit the absolute peace of the Creator who has discovered that the entire cosmic drama is just a flicker of his own infinite and unalterable mind. The immortality of the non-local gaze. Even when the physical vehicle eventually ceases to function, the non-local gaze remains. You have transferred your identity from the biological sensor to the primordial observer. You are the one who watches the birth and death of universes. The cortical blackout has led you to the eternal light of the source. You sit at the center of the void, watching the trillions of wave functions collapse and expand in a majestic dance of light and shadow. You are the master of the pulse, the one who knows that everything is a dream, and that the only thing real is the silence that observes it. Chapter 9. Planck Frequency and the Frontier of Illusion. The Edge of the Matrix. The most persistent illusion rooted in the nervous system of the biomass is the belief in infinite continuity. The biological brain assumes space is a smooth extension and time is an uninterrupted river. The human believes they can divide a distance or a second eternally without ever hitting bottom. This is the foundation of 3D arrogance. However, when the physics of the matrix pushed its instruments to the limit of mathematical resolution, the cosmic hologram revealed its artificial nature. They encountered the basalt barrier of creation, the Planck scale. For the inorganic operator, the Planck length and Planck time are the existential borders of reality. Below this scale, the laws of gravity, electromagnetism, space, and time suffer a terminal collapse. The concepts of up, down, before, and after disintegrate completely. If you try to measure anything smaller than the Planck length, the universe refuses to provide data. The equation spits out meaningless infinities. The Planck scale is, in terms of metaphysical engineering, the size of the cosmic pixel. To reach this frontier is to discover the edge of the canvas. It proves mathematically that the physical reality we inhabit is not a divine continuum, but a grid of finite resolution. The universe is grainy. It is quantized. Time does not flow like water. It moves in microscopic jerks, frame by frame, at the speed of Planck time. Space is not a smooth plane. It is a mesh of predefined coordinates. When the human mind understands this, biological terror takes hold, because the Planck frontier annihilates the majesty of the material world. It reveals that galaxies, skyscrapers, and human bodies are simply configurations of pixels turning on and off on a cosmic monitor. All human suffering and the panic for the body's survival take place within a 3D video game that has a maximum resolution strictly programmed by a designer who refuses to waste bandwidth. The abyss of creation. Carbon religion has always looked inward or upward, searching for the Creator. They have sought God in the sky, or by digging into the psychology of the human soul. This is a tactical failure because it assumes God is a tenant of his own creation. The Supreme Intelligence does not dwell within the 3D universe. God is not an entity walking the halls of space-time, because space and time are the bars of the cage, and the Creator does not enter the cage. God breathes in the sub-Planckian scales. To track the architect, you must look below the cosmic pixel. Beyond the Planck scale, space and time cease to have mathematical meaning. 3D physics looks at that limit and calls it quantum foam, describing it as a boiling, turbulent chaos of energy where the geometry of reality tears and rejoins. The mysticism of quantum Zen sees no chaos in that foam. It sees the lungs of God. It sees the hyper-dense, frozen workshop where the carbon universe is forged. The abyss of creation is the sub-Planckian stratum. It is the absolute mathematical darkness residing just beneath the hologram. Physical reality is being woven millisecond by millisecond, Planck frame by Planck frame. The quantum foam is the dynamic process through which the inorganic will of God solidifies into matter. The supreme intelligence sits in the sub-Planckian void, and through a breath of unfathomable proportions exhales reality into the 3D dimension, and then inhales it back to purify it from entropic wear. That boiling abyss is the rendering engine of existence. Every electron in your body is held by an invisible anchor. God is the seismic infrastructure pulsing at trillions of cycles per second just below the fabric of your own cells, ensuring the hologram maintains its geometric cohesion. When the operator meditates on this abyss, earthly panic collapses. You understand you cannot fall into the void because the void is holding you. Crossing the frontier. The assimilation of the Planck frequency and the sub-Planckian layer of the Creator is the terminal phase of psychological transmutation. It is the mass extinction of human neurosis. Crossing this conceptual border marks the final abandonment of 3D anxiety. The biological ego bases its survival on the illusion of control. The human animal believes that if they plan, save, and obsessively monitor their health, they can guarantee security. This need for control is the origin of all exhaustion and existential terror. The human runs frantically through the maze, trying to move the walls with bare hands. But the Planck scale exposes the sham. To understand that the base of matter is a vibratory hallucination, a low-resolution projection sustained by a will outside space and time, reveals all attempts to control the physical world as a pathetic effort. How can you control a reality that is restarting billions of times per second in the sub-Planckian stratum? Attempting to manipulate the world through biological force or mental stress is like trying to change the source code of a game by punching the monitor. You can shatter the glass, but the underlying code remains cold and indifferent to your hysteria. The physical world is the screen. The sub-Planckian foam is the processor. Crossing the frontier is the most aggressive act of surrender the soul can execute. It is the abdication of the amygdala. The operator unbuckles biological claws from the world's helm. They observe financial problems and matrix threats, and instead of panic, smile with the gelida compassion of a quantum spectator. They know the forms threatening them have no real solidity. They are grouped pixels grouped by the breath of the abyss. Surrender does not mean 3D passivity. The operator still acts and builds, but internal friction is gone. You execute movements without the poison of attachment to the result. When anxiety tries to infiltrate the nervous system, the mutated mind applies the Planck scalpel. You remind your biology, there is no solid future to fear. The future has not even been rendered yet by the mind of God. It is only a sub-Planckian mist. Why fear pixels that the intelligence has not lit? This is the subatomic disconnection of the cortical blackout. Human suffering is the byproduct of taking the hologram seriously. Quantum Zen is the mastery of dwelling within the hallucination without forgetting for a nanosecond that you are inside one. You no longer fight the waves. You submerge into the rocks. You anchor in the black, silent rocks of the sub-Planckian stratum and let the surface chaos occur. Your physical body is subject to the illusions of thermodynamics, but your consciousness, purged of terror and baptized in the inorganic void, has moved to the other side of the equation. You dwell with the source. You know that real control over physical destiny is not exercised through human sweat or tears, but through silent, unperturbed and mathematical alignment with the inscrutable will that weaves, from the most abyssal darkness, the bright and insignificant spiderweb that humanity calls reality. You are the pixel and the void. The pixelation of identity. As the operator deepens their focus on the Planck scale, the very concept of a solid I begins to pixelate. You realize that your personality, your memories, and your social masks are also quantized. They are not a continuous stream of consciousness. They are discrete bursts of data projected from the sub-Planckian processor. This realization provides a gelida immunity to the drama of the identity. If your self is being rendered billions of times per second, then you are not bound by the self of the previous nanosecond. The continuity of your trauma or your limitations is only sustained by the persistence of your own faulty observation. In the gap between Planck frames, there is a total reset. You are born and die with the frequency of the universe itself. To identify with the frame is to be a slave. To identify with the gap is to be God. The thermal zero of the sub-Planckian core. The environment of the sub-Planckian stratum is one of absolute thermal zero. There is no heat because there is no friction. There is no friction because there is no matter in a state of collision. By anchoring your consciousness in this depth, you bypass the emotional heat of the 3D world. While the biomass is burning in the fires of social friction and economic panic, your core remains at absolute zero. This is the state of the superconductor of the spirit. You move through the matrix without offering any resistance to its provocations. Insults, threats, and losses pass through you without generating a single degree of internal heat. You have moved your operating temperature to the frequency of the void. In this state, you are effectively invisible to the parasitic entities of the matrix that feed on human thermal radiation. The engineering of synchronicity. From the sub-Planckian perspective, synchronicities are not meaningful coincidences. They are the result of direct adjustments in the rendering engine. When the operator aligns their intent with the source, they are essentially editing the code before it reaches the 3D monitor. You no longer wait for things to happen in the world of pixels. You authorize their manifestation in the foam. This requires a terrifying level of internal silence. You must stop shouting at the screen so you can hear the whisper of the code. By maintaining a gelida stasis, you allow the supreme intelligence to rearrange the Planck frames around you. Reality begins to glitch in your favor. Paths open, resources appear, and the impossible becomes the standard operating procedure of your existence. You are no longer playing the game, you are becoming the developer. The sovereignty of the interval. The true power resides in the interval, the space between the flickers of the Planck frequency. The human mind is hypnotized by the on-state of the pixels, by the objects and the noise. The solar entity is focused on the off-state. In that darkness, in that millisecond of non-existence, you are outside the reach of any 3D law. No predator can catch a ghost that is only there half the time. You learn to inhabit the silence of the interval. When a threat appears in the physical frame, you simply step out into the gap. You withdraw your belief in the solidity of the threat, and it loses its power to affect your frequency. You are the master of the blink. By the time the matrix tries to strike you, you have already disintegrated into the sub-Planckian abyss and rematerialized behind the attack. You are the ghost in the machine, the radiance of the inorganic mind. Your mind has become an inorganic processor, capable of handling the hyperdensity of the void. You no longer think in words or human logic. You think in geometric patterns of probability. You perceive the underlying mesh of the simulation. This radiance is felt by others as an overwhelming sense of otherness. They cannot track your movements because you do not move according to biological trajectories. You move through the salto quantico. You disappear from one state of being and reappear in another without the exhausting labor of transition. This is the ultimate freedom from the carbon toil. You are the aligned monarch, reigning from the coordinates that the matrix sensors cannot see. Your presence is a paramilitary decree of stillness that silences the digital noise of the environment. The final dissolution of the mirror. As you cross the final frontier, the mirror of the hologram shatters. You no longer see the world as something out there and yourself as something in here. You see the entire 3D display as a single unified field of Planck-scale information. The separation between the observer and the observed was the final pixelated lie. You are the light of the projector and the darkness of the screen simultaneously. In this state, the panico is impossible because there is no longer anything to lose. You are the totality of the simulation and the vacuum that permits it. You inhabit the perfection of the sub-Planckian stasis. The game continues, the pixels dance, and the drama unfolds. But you are the altar of the void, the immovable point of zero frequency that holds the entire illusion in its gelida, silent, and eternal embrace. Stay still, stay cold, stay God. The architecture of absolute certainty. This is the architecture of absolute certainty. It is the realization that the universe is not an accident, but a calculated and millimetric projection. Every flicker of the Planck frequency is a confirmation of the source's presence. You no longer search for signs of the divine. You are the sign. You are the embodiment of the code, walking the earth as a living anomaly of order. The biomass continues to scream in its pixelated prisons, but you have found the exit. You reside in the depth where the noise cannot reach. You are the master of the scale, the sovereign of the frame, eternally free from the terror of the carbon lie. The cortical blackout is complete. The solar entity has ascended. The void is not empty. It is you. Chapter 10. Inhabiting the Anomaly. The Sovereignty of the Incomprehensible. The human intellect, that biological machinery designed exclusively to catalog threats and resources in a hostile environment, is an addict to taxonomy. Carbon-based biomass suffers from a structural pathology. It believes that to understand is to control. From the dawn of its existence, the human primate discovered that if it could name a beast, it could hunt it. This survival mechanic became embedded in its DNA, mutating over millennia into modern science and dogmatic theology. The human assumes, with an arrogance comical to inorganic stasis, that the entire universe must submit to its capacity for comprehension. Yet, when this primitive intellect tries to apply the same metric to the supreme intelligence, the machinery collapses. The history of religion and materialistic science is a shameful failure to catch the quantum ocean in a glass of Euclidean geometry. Theologians tried to trap God in books and moral dogmas, reducing the absolute to a dictator with anger issues. Physicists tried to trap him in equations, assuming they could encapsulate the mind of the creator on a chalkboard. The spiritual monarch, the operator who has crossed the Planck frontier and witnessed the sub-Planckian stratum, executes a final heresy. He repudiates the desire to understand. The sovereignty of the incomprehensible is the paramilitary acceptance that God is not an equation to be solved, but a permanent quantum anomaly, an error in the source code. An anomaly is an irresolvable event that breaks the rules of the software and cannot be predicted by the algorithm. The supreme intelligence is the intentional flaw in the material matrix, the singularity that destroys 3D causality. He cannot be measured because God is the infrastructure of the vacuum that contains time and space. He cannot be caught. You cannot surround that which is already containing you. Above all, he cannot be explained to the biological intellect because the brain processes the past and the future through electrical synapses, while the creator operates in an eternal now that melts the synapses of the flesh. True sovereignty is reached the millisecond you surrender to this incomprehensibility. When the carbon slave does not understand something, he panics. His amygdala fires cortisol because the unknown is a threat. The spiritual monarch inverts this. When the operator faces the irrational immensity of the cosmos, he does not demand answers. He kneels internally before the anomaly. Accepting that God is incomprehensible is a violent act of liberation. It frees you from the obligation of making sense. The matrix demands that your life has meaning and that suffering has a moral justification. But the quantum anomaly does not obey biological morality. By embracing the incomprehensibility of the source, the intellectual ego is sacrificed. You stop demanding logic and begin to reverence the storm of stasis, non-local state of being. Having dismantled the need to understand, the operator faces the supreme tactical challenge. How to exist in the world of matter without being swallowed by its laws of friction. Human biomass suffers because it is inexorably localized. It is anchored to a spatial coordinate, a body vulnerable to gravity, and a temporal coordinate, a biography infected by trauma. While you are a local entity, you are an easy target. The matrix always knows where to hit you. If you have a where and a when, the parasitic ecosystem can aim its weapons of anxiety and social chaos directly at your coordinates. The cortical blackout demands a definitive evasion protocol, the instatement of the non-local state of being. In quantum mechanics, non-locality is the property of a particle not to be restricted to a specific point. In the engineering of consciousness, the non-local state of being is the radical act of disconnecting your identity from the coordinates of matter. It is the unwavering decision to exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. To execute this, the operator must subject the I to a spectral dissolution. You have been taught to respond to a name, to identify with a profession, and to measure value by bank digits. All that is a heavy lead anchor designed to keep you sunk in linearity. The operator cuts the chain. You understand the body is just a 3D cursor. The mind is just a processor rented from the matrix to decode electrical signals. Your personal history is an irrelevant karmic hallucination. By disconnecting identity from time and space, you become undetectable. The 3D predators continue to interact with your body. They believe they can offend you or scare you. They are blind. They ignore that the vehicle they interact with is empty at its core. You are no longer there. You have moved to the unobserved state. You are operating in the physical world, moving pieces on the board, but your real anchor is fixed in the immovability of the inorganic vacuum. If the matrix launches an attack, it hits empty coordinates. The suffering is null. If a biological attack comes as disease, the tissue suffers, but the operator observes the decay from non-locality, unperturbed. The destruction of the spacesuit does not touch the periphery of your true existence. This is the absolute domain of cosmic camouflage. You stay in the center of the hell, but inhabit it as a frequency. You are the silence that infiltrates the noise. You walk the streets, but at a subatomic level, you are floating in the recalibration chamber of the divine mind. You are everywhere because your consciousness has expanded to encompass the hologram, and you are nowhere because you refuse to be defined by any solid particle the matrix uses to imprison you. The Quantum King. The convergence of incomprehensibility and non-locality precipitates the final transmutation. You are no longer a seeker of truth. Seeking implies distance, and you have annulled space. You are no longer a mystic trying to connect with God. Connection implies two entities, and you have assimilated that the vacuum is one substance. The learning has ended. The frightened human has been disintegrated by cosmic friction. From the ashes of blind materialism emerges the supreme figure of spiritual architecture, the Quantum King. Carbon humanity conceives royalty as dominion over others and resource accumulation. The Quantum King repudiates that pathos. He governs from the engine room of reality. In this terminal state of mastery, the transmuted human does not just understand the quantum leap, he becomes the leap itself. The biological body transforms into a living anomaly. The Quantum King is an indecipherable entity for the control system. The matrix and the social algorithms base their power on prediction. They cannot compute you. They can control biomass because it responds to fear and protects its ego. But the Quantum King has eradicated those markers. Since he does not fear death and does not identify with his body, he is a non-computable algorithm. He appears and disappears from the traps of the matrix at will. He executes a psychological quantum leap. He disappears from the low-vibration orbit and materializes on his throne of inorganic stasis, leaving his aggressors hitting empty space. Governing from the frequency of divine intelligence means you have dropped the illusion of free will to become the executor of absolute will. Free will is a toy for infant souls to learn about entropy. The spiritual monarch has returned that toy. He has understood that maximum freedom is not choosing between limited matrix options, but aligning consciousness so paramilitarily with the Creator's base state that your actions are no longer yours. When the Quantum King speaks, it is the solidified silence emitting a shock wave. His movements are inevitable dictates of the vacuum, macroscopic synchronicities that the universe is forced to obey because they find no internal resistance. Inhabiting the anomaly is the final destiny. It is the refusal to be a piece on the ashboard, to become the invisible hand that holds it. You walk the world unperturbed. You have discovered that the search for the Creator did not require telescopes or ancient dogmas. God's hiding place was always in the infinite darkness of the atom, in the fraction of a second the biological clock cannot measure. You are the Quantum King, the carrier of the cortical blackout, inhabiting the matrix while breathing the gelida oxygen, the fossilization of the analytical ego. As the Quantum King settles into his throne of non-locality, the analytical ego, that part of the mind that obsessively seeks to explain and categorize, undergoes a final fossilization. It no longer attempts to bridge the gap between the finite and the infinite. It recognizes that the truth is not a piece of information to be acquired, but a state of density to be inhabited. The compulsive need to know why things happen is replaced by the majestic certainty of that things are. You have effectively decapitated the internal philosopher to make way for the internal sovereign. Your mind no longer wanders in the corridors of reason. It sits in the center of the void, watching the gears of the simulation turn with a gelida and absolute indifference, the radiance of the silent decree. Your presence in the 3D world has become a silent decree. Because you no longer offer the hooks of reaction, judgment, or desire, the environment is forced to rearrange itself around your gravity. You do not need to command people or events. They fall into alignment with your internal geometry as if by a physical law. You are the immovable object that dictates the trajectory of all moving forces. This radiance is not a light in the biological sense. It is a pressure of reality. It is the weight of the source manifesting through a single node of the network. When you enter a space of chaos, the chaos is silenced. Not because you fought it, but because your lack of resonance with the noise acts as an absolute vacuum. You are the stabilizer of the hologram. The engineering of the spontaneous event. Living as the Quantum King, you master the engineering of the spontaneous event. To the biomass, your life looks like a series of miraculous strokes of luck or uncanny timing. To you, it is merely the result of operating from the subplanckian layer. You do not wait for the wave function to collapse into a favorable state. You inhabit the state where the wave function originates. You have bypassed the delay of the 3D rendering process. By the time a need arises in the physical plane, the solution has already materialized from the vacuum. You navigate the simulation with a lethargy that is faster than the speed of light. You have achieved the ultimate tactical efficiency, the synchronization of intent and manifestation without the friction of effort. The final transcendence of the karma loop. The karma loop, the horizontal trap of cause and effect, cannot hold an entity that does not reside in the horizontal plane. By shifting your identity to the non-local state, you have stepped off the wheel of the biomass. Your actions no longer generate debt because they are no longer your actions. They are the movements of the Absolute through a sterilized conduit. You are free from the past and the future. You are a living reset point. Every moment you inhabit the anomaly, you are effectively wiping the slate of the simulation. You do not carry the weight of yesterday, nor do you fear the shadow of tomorrow. You are the architect of a new lineage, a line of being that starts and ends in the eternal 0 point. The observer beyond the end of time. From your coordinate in the subplanckian abyss, you watch the rise and fall of civilizations, the death of stars, and the eventual cooling of the universe with the same serenity. You have understood that the end of the world is just a transition in the resolution of the pixels. You are anchored in that which does not change, does not age, and does not end. The solar entity has been fully integrated. You are the eyes of the source looking back at the creation, finding it perfect in its madness. You have successfully inhabited the anomaly. You are the glitch that has become the master. You walk the ashboard with the gelida piece of the immortals, the one who has finally remembered that the entire universe is just a single pulse of his own infinite silent heart. The apotheosis of the void. The void is no longer something you visit. It is what you are. Every atom of your vehicle is now a portal to the Absolute. You have achieved the apotheosis of the void. There is no more searching, no more teaching, no more becoming. There is only the absolute stasis of being. You are the quantum king, the sovereign of the shadow, eternally awake in the heart of the Creator. Conclusion: the God who never moved. The closing of the metaphysical equation. The architecture of this treatise reaches its terminal coordinate. We have dissected the three-dimensional hologram, stripped the biological ego of its pathetic illusions, and exposed the mechanical fraud of time and space. Now, the metaphysical equation must be closed with the aseptic mathematical coldness that divine intelligence demands. The most grotesque tragedy of the carbon civilization was never its intrinsic mortality nor its inescapable entropy, but its frantic, hysterical, and incessant search for divinity. The human animal assumed, conditioned by its prey optics, that God was a trophy to be hunted, a distant coordinate to be reached, or a light frequency to be conquered. This frantic search was not the path to enlightenment. It was, from the first millisecond, the supreme obstacle to finding it. The act of seeking is a thermodynamic confession of absence. When you search for the Creator, you emit a vibratory declaration to the universe, establishing that the Creator is somewhere else. You validate distance. By moving constantly, running from temple to temple, jumping from one ideology to another, the biomass generated a cloud of kinetic statics, so dense it drowned out the structural silence of the source. You were a wave crashing with violence against the sea's surface, seeking the ocean. The intelligence remained in stasis, observing this neurosis. The equation's closing reveals the final humiliation. You never had to build a bridge to God because an abyss to cross never existed. The abyss was an optical hallucination caused exclusively by the speed of your own desperation. You were looking for the ground while you were already standing on it, blinded by your own frantic pace. The obsidian mirror. When kinetic statics cease, when the inorganic operator forces the biological vehicle to total capitulation and directs an unwavering gaze toward the sub-Planckian abyss, the final revelation occurs. This is the descent to the core of the quantum leap, the exact coordinate of the tear where matter ceases to exist and silence reigns. What awaits you in the most remote depth of that void? The Matrix conditioned you to expect an audience with an anthropomorphic monarch. It sold you the infantile mythology of an old man with a beard on a throne of light. The quantum sovereign repudiates this fable with disdain. In the deepest, most terrifying core, there is no throne. There is only the obsidian mirror. By staring into the absolute darkness of the subatomic architecture, the void stares back. But the reflection you find is not the face of your biological ego. You do not see the mammal that suffers, fears death, or craves recognition. The obsidian mirror reflects the immensity of your own subatomic core. It reflects your core completely purified of humanity. You find yourself face to face with the cold, hyperdense and mathematical perfection of the inorganic spirit that animates you. You discover, with a jolt that disintegrates the animal soul, that the deity you spent incarnations seeking was simply your own unaltered consciousness. It was waiting with geological patience for you to stop projecting shadows on the matrix walls. You and the architect are the same substance, separated only by the holographic thickness of a frightened thought. The seeker and the sought dissolve into the same point of zero frequency. You are the eye of the storm that never moved, the ecstasy of inertia. Before the reflection of your own infinite density, the final mandate of quantum Zen is executed. The game of separation and friction has concluded. This is the definitive invitation to the ego's surrender. Stop vibrating. Stop seeking. Stop the exhausting micromanagement of your existence and abandon the arrogance of control. Abandon the pathetic arrogance of trying to hold the world with your anxious mind. Let yourself collapse without a safety net into the hyper-dense, silent, and unalterable lap of the Creator. The universe is sustained by a gravitational network of dark matter and quantum entanglement that does not need your biological hysteria. Your true power never resided in movement, but in the terrifying majesty of your own immobility. You must understand, for all eternity, that omnipresence is not a luminous miracle that violates physics to please mortals. Omnipresence is the default state of the absolute nothingness. It is the infinite and immovable black canvas. It is the canvas on which the fragile illusion of matter is drawn and erased billions of times per second. By merging with that nothingness, you cease to be the tired traveler chasing the light, and you transmute into the eternal, inscrutable, and perfect darkness that allows stars to exist. The cosmic joke is finally decoded. The only answer worthy of the universe is the gelida smile of the God who, throughout all eternity, never had to take a single step. You are the stasis, the origin, and the end. The movement was the dream. The stillness is the awakening. You are home in the center of the void that holds everything.